Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Ellie. I'm a peer mentor here at Southwestern, and this is my partner.
Hi everybody, my name is Victoria. I'm also a peer mentor with the first year program. Today we're going to be talking about implicit bias. We're going to be answering, some questions. What is it? Why should we care about it? What does it look like? Is it wrong? If it is, what should we do about it? We're going to discuss, what bias is, so we understand the root of the topic, and then we'll go into what implicit bias means.
Yeah, just a quick question before we actually get into it. Can we hear from you guys in the chat or unmute yourselves? Do you guys like pineapple on pizza or do you not like pineapple on pizza? Just a little icebreaker question. Okay, yes, I see a lot of yeses. Jaime says no, period. Mario likes pineapple on pizza. Anna doesn't mind it.
Not entirely happy with the full chat.
It's mixed. It's mixed. All right, cool. Thank you. Now we can go on with the bias.
The correct answer was yes, pineapple on pizza.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, Victoria, do you want to explain what a bias is?
Oh yeah. Bias basically is something that we do consciously or unconsciously. It is a prejudice. We favor something against something else. We favor pineapple on pizza versus no pineapple on pizza. Except a lot of the time it's something that affects a person, a group compared to another, or a thing, a place, and it's typically unfair. It's very different from what a vibe is. Sometimes we're around people and we get a certain vibe, we get a certain feeling. And that is something good because that helps us stay safe. But when it comes to a bias, this is purely because of what we know, what we think, and not necessarily like what our instincts tell us. So they're very different things. But today we're talking purely about bias and implicit bias.
Yeah, so now that we know what a bias is, what do you think implicit bias is? So if you want to put it down in the chat or if you want to unmute yourself, there are no wrong answers. We just want to see what y'all think of it before we actually get into it. So just think of the word implicit. What makes it different from a normal bias? Okay, so Jaime says bias that isn't easily apparent. Yeah, that's totally right. Awesome. Mari says attitudes towards people without our conscious knowledge. Yeah, totally. Rebecca, kind of like stereotypes. That's exactly, yeah, that's like right on. I think you guys cheated. I think you like saw the next slide or something. Things we do without noticing. Yeah, so those are all some great answers. So, I mean, first of all, let's just talk about the word implicit, right? It's basically saying it's indirect, it's hinted at, but it's not clear, it's not obvious. So, according to Webster, an implicit bias is a bias or prejudice that is present but not consciously held or recognized. So, like many of you said, that we don't notice it. And that's why I actually include like a little magnifying glass right there, because we have to look a little bit deeper to really see what kind of biases we have. And there have been studies that show that students like us, nurses, doctors, police officers, and so on, actually do exhibit those implicit biases, whether it be in regards to race, to ethnicity, to gender, social status, and anything like that. And just going along with that, I I used to think that biases were just completely negative, but actually, according to the Kirwan Institute, they have shown that these biases do encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments. So it's just a matter of um, not really being aware that it's happening. Is mostly involuntary. And it's just important to recognize our biases because they do influence the way that we treat each other and the way that we think about one another. Victoria, do you want to explain the news, the social media?
On social media, on the news, a lot of times we get full face bias. It's not something that's hidden. People make it very vocal and very aware of what they think of politics, what they think of people, what they think of a certain type of people. It's something that floods around us. And because of that, it does affect us mentally. When we decide, for example, to look at this picture, we see several different types. But if we notice there's one thing in common with all of them, if somebody can put in the chat what they think or what they've noticed, you can go ahead and do that or unmute yourself. Totally up to you. Exactly. Mari says there's 3 people with different clothing. It's the same person on each row, just in different clothes. And a lot of times we judge people based off of, or we have a implicit bias based off of what somebody's wearing. Yet somebody could be wearing, I don't know, one of these outfits, and they could end up being, a CEO of something, a doctor, a dentist, where we ourselves are thinking that maybe, oh, okay, they're, something lesser. They're a janitor, they're a mechanic, they're a gardener, they're a painter. But in reality, we don't know their lives. We're judging it based off of what they look like. And we do it unconscientiously, again, because we are also affected by what the media does. And that's not necessarily fair.
Yeah, actually, I do want to touch a little bit more on the social media and just like news biases because I feel like a lot of the times we don't even realize that they're actually there. So if you could go back to the last slide real quick, just to show like the little chart. Yeah. So yeah, like it says in the chart, there are some news channels like CNN who lean more towards the liberal side, or other ones like what is that? CBN, that's more like Republican. So, the channels that we choose to watch or how we choose to watch social media, it really does influence the way that we receive information. Like for example, the other day I was watching this other news channel that I normally don't watch, but they were talking about COVID, and the reporter referred to it as the Chinese virus, not coronavirus. So it's like those little things that really do, change the way that we think about things, right? So that's why it's important to like be aware of them. But yeah, we can go on to the next one. And like Victoria said, appearance really does affect the way that we assume things about people. And I did find this example about, there's a mystery emergency patient who looks like he's an addict, right? And he would probably get naloxone, which is the treatment. And much of the time, it's a good thing because those emergency physicians do have to, use their biases and based on assumptions just to make that quick decision and recognize, okay, this person is an addict or at least looks like one. So we'll give them this, and it could potentially, be really helpful for them. So that's just one example of how, those implicit biases could be a positive thing for someone.
Now, when it comes to a bias or an implicit bias, there is such a thing as a harmless one. We did touch a little bit on pineapple on pizza, but it can go bigger than that. It can be um, something that we feel strongly about, but it doesn't hurt somebody. It doesn't negatively affect someone's life, and it doesn't um, harm society. It doesn't make things difficult for anybody else. So, a couple of the things would be, at least the ones that I know that are very strong biases, is Marvel versus DC. There is a very big fandom on both sides, and they have a bias and an implicit bias to the other. Another one that some people may be very familiar with now that K-pop is becoming bigger, there is such a thing as a K-pop bias. You are leaning more towards one company or one band versus another. Um, again, having very strong feelings, but that doesn't really hurt anybody. That doesn't cause any damaging effects. So we can have harmless biases, um, but we just have to, make sure that they stay positive rather than negative.
Yeah, so now that we know what an implicit bias is, why should we care about it? Well, first of all, I think that us being in the US, it's a very diverse place. If you even look around in the Zoom call, we all look different. We're all from different areas, speak different languages, and we're just very diverse. So I think it makes it even more important in that sense to be inclusive of everyone and be aware of our implicit biases because they do affect how we treat others. And let's say that we were living in a more homogenous society with people that all thought the same, looked the same. I guess it wouldn't be as important, right? But in this case, we really just want to cultivate that inclusivity by just recognizing those biases.
Exactly. And it is still something that happens. It is still an issue. It is still something that is affecting other people, causing certain people to be treated disrespectfully. And there is so much that our society worldwide is capable of. But because we have these thoughts, and I say we because, you know, we all have the habit or tendency to accidentally do it, but it's something that is stunting our growth. It is stopping us from becoming the best that we can be. And because of that, we even have to think of what the consequences of our implicit or someone's implicit bias is. As we have seen in the past few years, the effects of an implicit bias, of a prejudice, has been fatal. A lot of lives have been lost that didn't need to. Um, the thing we need to focus on is growing our society, working on saving lives and bettering them than losing them. Now, we did talk a little bit about, losing some people, but there's also more downsides to an implicit bias. For example, it does segregate people. It does put people in different classes, in different groups. And because of that, nobody looks at each other equally, even though we all are, no matter what background, what color of our skin, or other things that we identify with. It does create a natural hierarchy. It does put people underneath people, underneath people, underneath people. And again, that's not fair. At the same time, if it happens to us, it distorts how we see ourselves. It makes us feel less worthy of all of the good things that we are actually, worthy of. Um, and then throughout history, it has been proven that it promotes the discrimination of race, where you come from, who you are, what your culture is, what your gender is, what your belief system is, what you identify as in regards to, you know, the LGBTQ plus community. It's not cohesive and bringing people together. It's actually bringing people apart.
Yes, very well said, Victoria. And now we're going to talk about how can we actually identify if we do have any implicit biases. So I did find a little quiz that you can do at home, and I will put the link in the chat. Um, but this is basically a little quiz from Harvard that you can do online, and they have lots of different things that you can test for. So you can test for bias in regards to race. You can test for bias in regards to age, to gender. There was even one talking about bias to weight, which I had never really thought about. So I thought that was super interesting. And yeah, you can do those, and I'll show a little example in the next slide. But if Victoria wants to go and explain, oh, okay. I mean, I can do the, okay. Well, these are the examples of the quiz. So basically, if you look at the bottom left, we have an example question asking, how much do you feel similar to people who are thin? So you can put very similar, not at all similar, or the top one, which statement best describes you? I strongly prefer fat people to thin people. I slightly prefer. So it just sort of makes you think about like, maybe do I treat other people differently because of their weight? Like, you know, it's something to think about. And then going along with that, in the bottom right, we see one in regards to race. So this one basically asks you to take a look at those pictures, and then you have good and bad words. So you match a picture with a good word or a bad word. So you might look at the first picture and be like, okay, this person looks cheerful, and so on. So you just sort of see, like, depending on just someone's appearance, how you would think about them. So I thought that was super interesting. That's just one way where you can see if you have any biases. And Victoria's going to explain a little bit more about that.
Going the wrong way. When we identify implicit bias, we have to ask just a little kind of questionnaire to ourselves. What was the intention? What was the tone that came out of our, you know, came out of our mouths, or came out of somebody else's mouth? Does it appeal to stereotypes? This world is full of them, and we have to be careful that what we're saying isn't appealing to those or promoting those. We need to analyze the social environment. Each culture is different. Each culture has different things that they say that can be taken as offensive, but in reality, it's not. For example, in sign language, when describing a person or trying to identify a person, a you know, way to say that, you know, they are not, they're a little bit thick, you kind of go, and to some people that sign could be taken as offensive, but in reality it's not. It's just what they use. So we have to be aware of where we're at and what is appropriate. Even more so, are we at work? Are we at school? Is this kind of conversation even appropriate? Each environment itself has something that, you know, we need to be aware of. So it's a lot on the way we communicate without using actual words.
Yes, all right. So now it's like a lot of talking. We'll see a little checkup. We'll see a little thumbs up. Put in the chat how you're feeling. Awesome. I see some thumbs up in there. Yes. All right. So let's get on with it. So what if it happens? You know, first of all, we want to speak up because prejudice is not tolerated in Southwestern, nor is it tolerated anywhere really. And we just want to make sure that, you know, if we do realize that we are saying something that does include like an implicit bias or someone else, just don't be afraid to say something, like I was like in the little peer mediation program in high school, and we talked about being an upstander, not a bystander. So whether that be us or someone else, just owning up to it, or just being, vocal about how it made the other person feel, and just really being honest and just communicating with other people. But yeah.
Then, we talked about being aware of our nonverbal communication, but we also have to be aware, and the main damage that happens is when we speak, when we talk, when we use words. We have to, understand that words have power, and it can build somebody up or it can tear them down. And that kind of power, like my dad used to tell me as a kid, it needs to be used for good and not for bad. We need to be a positive force rather than a negative one. So if we use the right words and are aware of the words we're using, then we can either stop it from happening or help it not happen.
Yeah, so now it's your turn, like Victoria said, being considerate of our word choice. So going along with that, just talking about using progressive terms, like POC, I'm a liberal, I'm a feminist, LGBTQ plus, and so on. Those are all terms that we tend to use nowadays, that do promote inclusivity. And a little example we have here. So let's say that you meet someone and you want to ask how they identify. How would you ask? So if you want to put it in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, just want to see how you would do it.
And there's no, right or wrong answer. It's specific to you. Mm-hmm. How would you approach the situation?
Yeah. This is all a learning experience for all of us. Maybe you would start with talking about yourself to make the other person feel comfortable.
Or even broaching the situation directly. I like how Madi says, hello, my pronouns is she and hers. What's yours? We don't want to, have a wrong tone when we ask that. That's where nonverbal communication would be important, but it's okay to be direct. The main point is you don't want to offend somebody.
Yeah. No, yeah, like Mari said, that one was perfect because she introduced her pronouns. So that's sort of like introducing herself, and then asking if they're comfortable to share theirs as well, and so on, but that's a perfect example. Thank you, Mari.
The next thing we've talked about it continuously is being mindful, being aware, being in the moment, not, considering other situations or other things or just about ourselves. We want to be aware of not only our own behavior and mindful of what we're doing, but also what somebody else is doing. We need to read the body language. We need to read their facial expressions. We need to read the way that they're saying something. Not too far into it where we get a little crazy, but just enough that we can understand them. So this is where another example comes in. I want to know what you guys would do if a friend was to come and ask you for help, but you can't assist them. Something's up, you can't do anything. How do you say no without making them feel awkward that they asked for help? Just touching on the last scenario, I like actually kind of what Jovan said. I always try to get information on pronouns right off the bat and make it known that I'm curious so that there's no intentional disrespect, to make sure that everything's, good, kosher. I like that. Madi says, for this current situation, I would love to help you, but I can't right now. Starting off positive and then, getting straight to the point. Sometimes people got to be let down easy. We gotta, be kind, but also be realistic. Javon says, I would if I could, and then I'd apologize. Yeah. Genesis says, I appreciate that you reached out to me, but unfortunately, I can't help at the moment. I would if I was able to, but sadly, I can't. And then Rebecca says, maybe next time. Exactly. You don't want to just be like, no, I don't want to help you, or I can't help you, because that can be a little harsh. That can be a little mean. But when you take time to consider that they ask for help, and that's not something easy to do, then we can come up with like these responses, something that is, a bit more loving, a bit more mindful. And then on that note, we want to be loving. We want to show that we care about the person's feelings. The conversation isn't about us, it's about two people. And so when we're loving, we're ensuring that we're not hurting the other person. Sometimes that happens and we don't mean to, but as long as it's not intentional and we're doing what we can to stop it, that's the whole point. So for this scenario, I want to know what you guys would do when, you have a cousin that is sensitive about politics, common topic right now. And you know what? You know that if you ask a certain question, it gets them riled. So do you question them? Do you poke at them just to rile them up? Just, for entertainment? Sorry, no, I wouldn't rile them up. Just a little brief side note, Rebecca saying no. My brother is very much opinionated. My parents raised very strong personalities. And as a kid, he had a lot of passion about certain topics, one of them being politics and government. His friends would look at him because it was funny, because of how he reacted. Now, judging from the comments, I would understand that that wasn't very loving, that wasn't something that was okay. I like that Anna saying no politics and family reunions, 100%. And then Madi asking if they're comfortable talking about politics. And then Hamed trying to understand their viewpoint, because it's good to have a discourse. Exactly. You're not poking at them to get a reaction. You genuinely want to have a discussion. There is a difference. Javon saying he would use context clues, going back to being mindful of somebody else's behavior, of the situation. It's 100% great. So just like my brother with this cousin, we're not going to do it on purpose, because that's not kind, that's not loving, and it gets their blood pressure up for absolutely no reason.
Yeah, no, I love what you said, Victoria. And I think, like in Jaime's case, right, where he was trying to understand their point of view. If you are going to talk about it, I think it also has a lot to do with how you ask the question, right? Because let's say if you do decide to go on with the topic, even though that they're sensitive about it, there's different ways of going about it. Because let's say if I ask someone, if I was like, oh, don't you think Biden is so annoying? Versus, what do you think about Biden? It's like two very different reactions that you're gonna get from that person. So just, like watching like how we ask those things, even though we might have like a good intention with it, it is important to know how to ask if you are going to.
Exactly. Everyone else. So now over to you. Do you guys have any questions? Do you have any comments? Put them in the chat. You can unmute yourself. This is the time to ask us, anything about the topic. I'd say anything, but, let's try and keep it about implicit bias or pineapple on pizza. I like that question. What is a great way to identify somebody else's bias? coming from Jaime. I would identify it, again, based on their actions and their choices. Normally, if somebody acts a certain way, we can usually use context clues to connect the dots, so to speak. Sometimes it's not always obvious and we can get it wrong, and that's just the situation. But if we observe somebody and take the time to focus on somebody other than ourselves, it can give us a lot of answers as to how to react and act.
Yeah, I think talking about like observations, I think is also like a really good point, because you have to observe everything about that person, because there's so many things that influence the way that we think, the way we grew up, where we grew up, just like things like that that really do change the way that we think about things. Because if someone, I don't know, like grew up rich, maybe they might have a bias in that sense, because they wouldn't understand what it's like, to like, I don't know, be poor, or like just like things that don't come as easy to everyone else, right? So yeah, I guess just like really trying to analyze things about that person. All right, pop quiz, y'all. So now that you had time to ask questions, we're gonna ask just a couple of things just to make sure you guys got everything down. So first one, what is implicit bias? You want to put on the chat? You want to mute yourself? It could be a really short definition. Doesn't have to be too much.
Digital time, the waiting period for someone to type. Kind of bias that isn't easily apparent.
Yeah.
He was right the first time. The next question, just because we got that right, we know what it is. Are implicit biases good or bad? And give us an example. It's good. Both. They can be both. It's good. And Mari's example was Marvel versus DC. Yes. But most of you guys are saying both. And that's the right answer. It can be both. It just depends on what the topic is. You guys are putting great examples in here. Some can help and be harmless, like cats versus dogs, but then some can be harmful by Genesis. I like that one because that's 100% true. Number 3, how can we stop ourselves from having an implicit bias? Somebody has their hand up.
Yeah, I see Javon has his hand up.
No, I was gonna touch on the last question. I was gonna say that I forgot what I was gonna say already, but no, I was just gonna touch on the last question. Sorry.
No worries. If you get it back, more than welcome to comment on it. For question 3, Mari says, be kind, be mindful, and think before you speak. And then Rebecca says, have an open mindset. A lot of you guys in the comments did talk about being open-minded and not, tunnel vision on certain topics. So that is a perfect way to make sure that we ourselves aren't contributing to the problems, but rather, helping it. And it says, treat people with kindness. Treat people the way we want to be treated. And we all want to be treated with kindness and, just people being nice. If somebody is nice, they're not going to poke at you for fun because they like your reaction.
Yeah. Jaime says, understand other people's perspective. Yeah, of course. Javon was going to say that it all depends on your delivery of your opinion that determines whether or not it is good or bad. Yeah, delivery is like a big thing. I think that's a really great topic to point out, of course. All right, so last question. Is there bias in the media?
All of them coming in, yes, yes, yes. There really is. Now I'm going to add a little part B to that. Does the bias in the media affect us? Mari says yes.
Javon says media is biased. Ooh, I like that. I like that.
Anna says depends. I like that one because it does. Jaime says it does. Genesis says of course. Gary says absolutely. It can unconsciously affect us. We don't mean it to, but we can find ourselves getting riled up about topics that we didn't realize we were passionate about purely because of what we're seeing and hearing. So another way to, again, be mindful of what we're surrounding ourselves with. With that, thank you very, very much for taking time today and joining us. We also have a little bit more time if there are more questions. But that is implicit bias, and I hope you guys walk away, learning something new.